All right, so let me just get everything set up here. It's been a little while since I've done this, and every time I set up for a live stream, it seems that I have to fix 1,000 little problems. So I did a little bit of fixing. Hopefully, the audio is good. I did test that. 50% of the time, it seems that something goes wrong with audio. And if there's one thing that I believe about video is people can generally excuse poor video, but they won't listen if there's poor audio. So it's important for me to have good audio because I want you to listen. I want you to watch, and I want you to listen. Especially here, what I'm going to do is read the first short story from the Jim Tully book, Many Lies Were Told, which if you are an initiate in the My Book cult, you should be getting that in the mail in the next day or two, if you haven't already. Let's see, I'm just copying the link to the video so I can share that where it is appropriate. So this video is intended for those following along with the My Book Cult project. But I have this book, and I'll talk about it in a second. This book is available through underworldamusements.com. At least less than 30 copies are available through underworldamusements.com. I did a print run of 66. I will not print more. It is an excellent collection of short stories and essays. And again, I thought I turned my phone off. Let me quiet this thing down. And now I'm getting notifications. I wonder if you're able to hear that. So, welcome if you are watching now. I'm going to post real quick onto Facebook, and then I will talk a little bit more about the book, and we will do this reading. It's just kind of an impromptu thing. I thought about it last night, and so this morning I'm doing that. I'm just going to jump over onto Facebook to the Underworld Amusements. Am I doing up talking Facebook? I don't want to up talk. I want to talk like a normal human being. Well, not a normal human being. Normal human beings sound pretty terrible when they talk. Join us live for an impromptu reading from I actually do have, I was going to say, this is what you get when you don't have a social media manager. You have to do it all yourself. But actually, fairly recently, I have had somebody helping me out. And maybe you've noticed a little bit of a change in the quantity and quality of posting on social media. But our friend Jeff has been helping out with Instagram and Facebook. Jeff has been posting most days material, and it seems to have been working. There's engagement is up, and you need to do that. I would rather not have Facebook and Instagram, and actually Jeff is quite frustrated with me because I refuse to re-enable my Twitter account because I think Twitter is just a load of hot garbage unless you're there to troll, basically. Or unless you're fairly untouchable. What? Oh, goodness. It's trying to get me to create an event instead of a post. Just please post. Okay. So the book, as you can see here, Many Lies Were Told. This is my my final proofing copy. So there's actually notes in it where I had to fix a few issues. You can see actually, I don't know if you can see. Let me get in here. I changed the edition number from 44 to 55, and then finally 66 because and I made 44 to 55 because I wanted a few extra, and then 55 to 66 because 66 is a cooler number than 55. That's kind of the arbitrary nature sometimes of these decisions. And you can see here when I was doing a last final reading of the book, I checked off essays as I read them, proofread them, and I made a note for myself. 7/14/21, finished proofreading. And that doesn't mean that the book doesn't have errors in it. It just means that I'd stopped looking for them effectively. But I think it's book's in really good shape. And for a book of only 66 copies, I think it's pretty damn good. Most importantly, the articles and essays here. These were originally written for the American Mercury, which was the journal published by H.L. Mencken in the 1930s. And the American Mercury itself, besides being a vehicle for Mencken's own writings, has been a great source of inspiration to me because I found quite a few writers that have had a significant long-term impact on me and interest. Jim Tully was one of those, and actually Benjamin de Cassier's his Hymn to Satan was published in the American Mercury, and I found Jim Tully actually in reverse order. I originally picked up a copy of his book Circus Parade, and the book was dedicated possibly in part to H.L. Mencken. I thought it was actually a kind of a kid's book when I picked it up, but I do like circus and vagabond stories, and I hadn't heard of Jim Tully before, so I picked it up, and then just casually looking at it, I saw it was dedicated to H.L. Mencken, and then I realized there must be something more. This was quite some time ago. This might have been 20 years ago. I think it was in a Goodwill. I picked up a copy of Circus Parade, and it turned out to be one of my favorite novels. And to then learn that there was a lot of writing in H.L. Mencken's journal, The American Mercury, by Tully, it was super exciting. At some point, I decided to put this collection together. Now, why am I only ever doing 66 copies of this? Because, and I'll tell you this, my enthusiasm sometimes gets ahead of me. And I was doing a lot of collecting and reading of Jim Tully, but when I started working on this project, I hadn't read all of his books. I hadn't obtained all of his books. Some of his books can be very rare and expensive. And so it turns out that a good deal of these short stories were actually collected in two different subsequent books. Sorry, there's the dog in the background. And so those books actually have not only these, but also more. So I did a whole lot of work to kind of put this book together. And then it turned out that, and thinking that the material was a little harder to get, or it hadn't been collected together. And I was wrong. So there we go. But for the My Book Cult project, I saw an opportunity to kind of finish the book that I had envisioned years ago and do just this limited edition. So kind of there's the story behind Many Lies Were Told and why it exists. So it seems that we went from 4 viewers just a few minutes ago to possibly 0 viewers right now. So that's excellent. No, I don't know. Metrics, showing metrics there. All right. We're going to go ahead and move along to reading the short story. And I was hoping a few more would join. I guess this is the thing that nobody wants to hear. Nobody wants to hear a streamer saying, "Oh, well, let's just get a few more people," because this is going to be on YouTube. It's going to be posted to Facebook, and I see a little bit of an uptick. And I think appropriately enough for this reading, I have cultivated a sort of vagabond look myself, and put on Grandpa's reading glasses here so I can do a little bit better and actually sing what the words look like. And we're going to go ahead and read. So this is the first short story in the book, and it really sets the tone. And I've read it a number of times, but I've never read it out loud. And I guess it's been a few weeks since I read it. So I'm going to do this all in one take. I'm not trying to create an audiobook, just trying to read something for, just kind of an impromptu reading. Bright Eyes. We were known as road kids in the parlance of hobos, and nearly 100 of us had assembled in Chicago from every state in the nation. What a gathering we were! Embryo pickpockets, bruisers, and yeggmen, and, maybe, a few future members of Rotary clubs. We lived like carefree scavengers on the very fringes of society. Out of orphanages, reform schools, and jails we had come, the sniveling and the stubborn, the mongrel and the thoroughbred, the weak and the never defeated. The youngest of us was about 12, the oldest about 15. A future champion pugilist was among us, and 5 lads who were to serve life for murder, and 14 others who were to be detained in different penitentiaries for lesser periods of time. One became a vaudeville headliner, another a political boss. Some were there to die fighting for a nation that, with boundless generosity, had given them but hallways and boxcars to sleep in. One became a Methodist minister, later falling from grace long enough to serve a term for forgery. He was then to climb back onto the chariot of God, where he remained until he died insane. We were a variegated crew. We lived at the Newsboys' home, a faded red brick building that overlooked Lake Michigan. The most popular lad in the institution was a little Italian whose real name we never knew. Young as we were, many of us had something to hide, and he was reticent. We did not question him. His eyes were large, brown, and sparkling. We called him Bright Eyes. Bright Eyes and I had reached the home on the same winter day. Blue with the cold and very lonely, we became friends immediately. Our natures were different. I was the rebel in knee breeches, with tangled red hair and heavy jaw, who told life to go to hell. Bright Eyes was as calm as a June morning after the rains are done. In those hungry, wind-whipped days, I hated routine as much as I do now, and every person I met tried to mold me to fit some form, but I always had my head stuck out. Bright Eyes was a gentleman and rebelled against life, but once, a year younger than I, he was much wiser. He knew by instinct that which I had been many years in the learning, that it doesn't pay to fight life. That is, after all, it doesn't matter. One either comes through or one doesn't, and often the thoroughbred is hamstrung in the race. Life is greater than its philosophers. Bright Eyes knew that. I remember one evening in the home when we assembled to meet a very wealthy lady. We all read compositions that we had written. I read my own aloud, and it was greeted with applause. I had written about General Wolfe, who was my favorite hero in those days. The grey-haired and bespectacled lady was amazed. She shook my hand and turned to the matron and said, "There's literary talent displayed here," and asked my name. It was my first literary triumph. All of us speculated as to the outcome of her remark. I lived in the clouds for 3 days waiting for her carriage to come after me. Bright Eyes said no word while I lived through that feverish dream. Reticent, as usual, he finally called me aside and said, "You'll never hear from her, Jim. Don't kid yourself. These people can't be bothered with the likes of you and me. Look at last Christmas. Not a soul came near the joint all day." He was right. I never heard from old Mist Marshall Field again. It was bitterly cold the week following. The wind howled from the lake for 7 days and 7 nights. As the home was closed from early in the morning until late in the afternoon, Bright Eyes and I were at the mercy of the cold. We were thinly clad. We had no change of outer clothing and no underclothing at all. At last, Bright Eyes got a job in a print shop. He had learned something of the trade somewhere. Cold as it was, I preferred the open streets, where I sold newspapers and carried luggage for travelers going from one station to another. And so several bitter weeks passed. One evening Bright Eyes returned wearing a bandage over his left eye. Some printer's ink had gotten into it. The eye grew worse. A doctor was called in. 3 weeks later his eye was removed. Unskilled in words of sympathy, we knew not what to say. For several days a sadness hung over the home. A patch was devised to hide the empty red socket. The sadness passed, and save for depressing moments, Bright Eyes was seemingly happy once again. But we called him Bright Eyes no longer. With the terseness of our world, we called him Blink. He never returned to the print shop. He had lost interest in work. The months drifted until spring. We took to the road and our ways diverged, but nearly all of us became hobos, and so I would come across him now and then in the underworld of some city. He was always worried for fear the loss of his eye would affect the sight of the other. It became a mania with him. Cheerful liar that I was, I told him such a thing was impossible. I argued that one-eyed people could always see better than people with 2 eyes. Blink tried to believe me. He became a hopeless vagrant. After years of wandering, some of us settled in Southern California, and there I met him again. He was still worrying about his blindness, and I did my usual lying. I told him about a fellow in the Navy with 1 eye who could see further than any other man who sailed ships. Blink listened quietly and then said, "God, Jim, I don't want to lose my other glim. There's so much to see." I immediately cut in, "But hell, Blink, you like music, and you can always hear that. And you can always hear engines whistling far off. Been blind ain't so damn bad." "Don't kid me, Jim. I'm on. I'd rather be in jail for life than blind. There ain't nothing worse." A Spanish girl passed in a riot of color, her lithe body alive with joy. Some red-winged blackbirds danced on the green grass, the plaza where we talked. Far away, through a rift in the Mexican tenements, we could see the mountains. The Spanish girl returned, singing. "That's a song about a bird with a broken wing," said Blink. "I wonder if he had just 1 glim, too." I believe that now and then there blossoms in the world a flower that has been 1,000 years in the forming. Blink had certain qualities that could be explained in no other way. His knowledge of music was astonishing. One-eyed vagabond that he was, he knew the folk music of all nations, and he knew grand opera, and he would go hungry to hear music. Often, indeed, he would beg his way to the topmost gallery to feed his soul. The Spanish girl's song died away. We remained tense and silent with wonder. 2 heavy-footed men approached. We knew them immediately as city detectives. "We want you as a vague," one of them said to Blink. "You've been hanging around here long enough." They took him to the nearest street corner and called the patrol wagon. Before I left him, I said, "Remember, Blink, you're not guilty, and stand trial." "All right, Red," he answered with absolute unconcern. I hurried away with hope of helping him. We were not without friends in Los Angeles, though all of them had been careful to avoid the trap of the law themselves. So when Blink faced the police the next morning, 5 of us were there to help him. He pleaded not guilty and stood trial. 2 of our friends who went in and out of the courtroom were opium smugglers. They had hurried from the Mexican border to help a friend. When the trial was over, they hurried to their work again. It was a 2-hour battle. The 2 detectives testified, but Blink's friends proved to their own satisfaction, and evidently the judges, that he had worked within the past 6 months. The young prosecutor harangued. The judge looked bored and kept gazing at a crookedly hung picture of Abraham Lincoln all through the trial. When the testimony was in, he gave Blink 6 months in jail and suspended the sentence, providing Blink got a job within a week. In 3 days, Blink had work as a printer's devil in the Los Angeles Times. He worked for 2 months at this job, but his fear of losing his other eye returned. Long weakened, it began to cause him trouble. His little band of uninfluential friends became alarmed. They persuaded him to go to the county hospital, where he lay on a bed for 4 months and underwent as many operations. When the doctors had finished, there were 2 empty red sockets instead of 1. I had encouraged him with the lies for 13 years. Now I found it hard to lie any further. After all, very little can be said to a man with 2 empty red sockets in his head. The thing to do was to keep him cheerful, yet every subject I raised seemed to be an ocular one. He would lie on his bed, his raven black hair rolling back from his forehead, and the tears welling out of the red holes in his head like water from a spring. He was taught the Braille system of reading, but there was no way they could bring him the sight of sun and rain and wild, free places. So a beaten creature he became, until it was decided to send him to the Institution for the Blind. An incoherent letter came to me, and I hurried to the hospital. "Can't you do something, Jim? I'd rather be dead than in jail for the blind. I don't want to be caged up anymore." Between us, it was decided to write General Harrison Gray Otis, owner of the Los Angeles Times. Our request would be small. Surely the great editor would use his influence to help Blink. All he wanted was the use of a street corner downtown where he could sell newspapers. I worked late into the night on the letter, which I felt certain would touch the old general's heart. The next morning, I had it typed, signed it Frank Thomas, the name Blink went by, and sent it by special delivery. Weeks passed, but no answer came. We sent another, and even more urgent letter, but it, too, remained unanswered. Another, registered, followed. It was also ignored. When I decided to gain an audience with General Otis by hook or crook, and then switch the conversation to Blink's plight. But that was no easy matter. Always fighting the world and often in fear for his life, the general was no easy man to see. After some days of consideration, it dawned upon me that his wife had written many sentimental verses for his paper. I had also written sentimental verses, so it occurred to me to send samples of them to the general, telling him that Blink had written them, and praising at the same time the verses of his wife. Accordingly, I sent with them an ambitious letter begging an interview with the great man, telling him of my youth and hard years, and also mentioning Ohio, for I had learned from Who's Who in America that he was born in my native state. I must have written one masterpiece of my life, for in 2 days I was invited to call to his home, the bivouac. A flunky looked at my letter to assure himself perhaps that I was not a labor agitator bent on murder. After some deliberation, he seated me in an alcove in the hallway. A weak-looking man sat near me. He also waited for the general. He could be heard in his library talking to 2 women who were begging money for the YWCA. The talk drifted to the last Sunday edition of the Times, and I heard the general ask one of the ladies if she had read his article on Henry E. Huntington, a local gentleman of wealth. The lady untactfully admitted that she had not read it. There was a pause. The lady made matters worse by trying to explain why she had not read the Sunday paper, and this was Wednesday. The general excused himself and went upstairs. I saw him pass, scowling. A few moments later, he sat down, $100 by his secretary. I could hear one of the ladies say, "Oh, dear, the general gave $200 the last time." The secretary explained that he felt that the $100 was all he could now afford. The ladies then took their departure. The fact that one of them had failed to read the Times that fatal Sunday had cost the YWCA $100. The secretary now invited me into the library to wait for the general. I looked about and saw many volumes of sentimental verse by such poets as Alice and Phoebe Cary, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Felicia Hemans, Ella Wheeler Wilcox, Mary Howitt, and others of even lesser fame. Presently the general entered, followed by the weak-looking man who had waited with me in the hall. The general turned upon him and said brusquely, "Well, what do you want?" The little lamb of a man faced the tiger and said, "Well, General, we are organizing an indemnity fund to protect such patriotic institutions as the Times against the ravages of labor agitators and socialists." The general scowled and said, as he paced the room restlessly, "To hell with that damn graft. I don't give a damn They didn't give a damn for me when my building was blown to pieces and 21 of my men were killed. I fought a battle, I did, for liberty and the Constitution. Without me, labor would crucify all enterprise in this state." The lamb bleated. "But, General, Earl Rogers thinks well of our plan." Earl Rogers was a brilliant lawyer who helped Clarence Darrow defend the McNamara brothers, dynamiters of the Times building in 1911. It was a fatal bleat. The general threw his hands in the air and roared, "He's a goddamn blank blank." Because this was still a time when you would put big blanks in your book instead of curse words. Then, pacing up and down the floor, he delivered a long harangue on the crimes of working men. The small man would rise to go, and the general would always shout, "Sit down! Sit down!" When the gentleman managed to leave, at last the general turned to me and said, "My God, these fellows are hard to get rid of." I immediately committed a great social blunder. I called him Mr. Otis. He turned upon me quickly. "General, if you please. Not that I'm vain, but young men should be taught discipline." My hand clenched. But I thought of Blink, and was humble once again, and to the general, all over the room. I mentioned my verses, but he preferred to rave against union labor. He stood before me, an immense man with stooping shoulders and heavy pouches under his eyes. His frame, once a great deal over 6 feet, had shriveled. He was a withered giant with a bag of skin on his bones. His eyes were close together, and the face wrinkles converged to the corners of them. There was a fanatical zeal of finality to every utterance. Unluckily for me, the departing sheep, who wanted to help the tiger fight labor for a price, had only succeeded in putting him in an evil mood. He raved on and on. Parrying for an opening, I shot in, "I was reading the other day, General, some verses I I lost the Irish accent that I was doing for Jim Tully. I'll go a little easy on it. I was reading the other day, General, some verses by your distinguished wife, General, and knowing how you must have helped her, General, I have made bold to write and ask you, General, if I might not presume upon your patience, General, not for myself, General, but for a blind boy friend of mine, General, who also writes verse, General. Huh? He grunted. Well, would you know a piece of news if you saw it coming down the street? The Irish in me was still unsubdued by so mighty a presence. I replied, I think so, General, but I'm not asking for myself, General. You see, General, I have a young friend who's blind, General. He writes verses, General, and he used to work on your paper helping printers, General. One eye was fairly good when he started there, General. We ain't blaming anybody, General. He might have lost it anyhow, General, though Blink claims all the towels was full of ink around the place, General. That was unfortunate, but I was busy generating him and untrained in the diplomacy. Damn it to hell! What's wrong with the towels? Everything's one damn complaint after another, by God! What in the hell do you want? Well, you see, General, I shot in quickly, Blink's blind as a bat, General, and he only wants a street corner, General. Only once? Oh, hell! Only once they all want something. But this won't cost a dime, General. The judge told Blink that if he didn't work, he'd send him to jail, General. And Blink wants a corner downtown where he can peddle papers, General. Why, he'll sell 2 times as for one examiner, General. He's a white boy, General, and I've never known him to double-cross anybody. How long did he work for me? Oh, not long, General, but his eye went gooey quick, and then it was curtains for Blink, General. The General walked rapidly up and down the floor, withered Red's hands behind his back, shaggy head bent low and long wrinkles stretching across his forehead. I can't do anything. There's places for blind men in this state. That's why we have government and pay taxes. Oh, but you see, I answered, stepping before him, no longer the humble, reformed road kid. You see, Blink's worse than blind. He has a head on him. I've seen him go nuts over a sunset. Seeing a scowl, my method changed for Blink's sake. And he used to like your wife's poems, General, and he read the Times and believed in all you said, General, and that's why he went to work for you, General. You could have started for some other paper. He could have started for some other paper, but he preferred to work for the Times, General. Ignoring my scrambled for words, he blurted out, We have a State Liability Act. Let that take care of him. Too many blind men peddling papers on the streets now. But something muffed with the State Act, General. They want to railroad him to the blind asylum, General, and he'll croak himself before he goes, I'm sure, General. By God, I would. I wouldn't eat their damn bread, General, if it was smeared with honey. And Blink's been in the other asylums for the poor, and so have I, General. And you know what they're like. The defiant old man, long used to the center of the stage, was ruffled by my effrontery. No, and I don't give a goddamn, he answered. Oh, but, General, you have a great soul. You just gave to the YWCA some money. A Blink doesn't ask for a thin dime. It makes no difference. The state should take care of him. He'd be in the world's way outside. There he'd be treated well. Maybe you're right, General, but I can't sell Blink the idea. I'd be a hypocrite if I tried. Well, that's enough. There's nothing I can do. Thank you, General, I said, and I left the room. I strolled into Westlake Park, unmindful of decorated nature everywhere. I would have to lie to Blink. I would have to tell him that the General would take his case under advisement, to tell him that the General would... I would have to say, you know, kid, again with the accent, I would have to say, you know, kid, whenever those big eyes go do that, let me start this all over again. You know, kid, whenever those big guys do that, something always happens. You'll have to be patient, though, Blink. These guys have a lot on their minds, and You may even have to take a ride to the blind joint for a while, and then some of us can sign the bond and get you out. General Otis sure'll help us. He ain't nearly the mean guy everybody makes him out. Jack London and Clarence Darrow and that gang only have their side of it, Blink. You gotta remember that Otis has his side too. Look at what lot of them guys did to this building. And, so thinking, I arrived at the county hospital. Blink, as usual, was stretched out on his hospital bed. His spirits were so low that he seldom had ambition enough to grope his way out the ward. To cheer him, his underworld visitors would disguise their voices and make him guess as who had come to see him. I said no word that day as I stood near his bed. He touched the muscles of my forearm, his way of recognizing me, and said with a touch of gaiety in his voice, "That you, Jim? God, I'm glad." "Yep, it's me, Blink, and I sure got some good news for you. Of course, it won't happen right away, but old General Debility Otis said that he'll do what he could. It'll take time, though, Blink. As you know, these guys are busy, so you'll have to be patient." "Oh, I'll be patient, Jim. God, I'll be patient. I can't do nothing else." He lay back on his bed, the black tangled hair sinking into the pillow. His hand clutched mine in a feverish grasp as I looked down on his handsome face and saw, as usual, the tears gush from the holes in his head. Overcome, I leaned on his breast and sobbed, "That goddamn hold, blank, blank, blank. Blink, I wish to Christ I could give you eyes. If you could have one of mine, if I could fix it, so's you could." The hands patted my shoulders. "That's all right, Jim. Maybe something'll happen." Sure thing, Jim. Sure thing, Blink. Nobody knows. Maybe in a year some guy'll invent eyes that you can see out of. They do funnier things than that." Hope came to Blink's voice. "I've been thinking about that, Jim. You know, maybe they can do that." "Oh, sure," I answered. "And I'll bet they'll be doing it, too. I bet you'll be taking dead men's eyes and fixing them in and tying up the nerves, so's it'll be like it was before people go blind. I read something about that the other day." I lied. 3 months had passed since the interview with Otis. Christmas came. The time was drawing near for Blink's journey to the hospital for the blind. All his poverty-stricken friends insisted that he go to the institution until more suitable arrangements could be made. During Christmas week, we took up a collection of nearly $70. We took the money to him, and with much forced banter and the words, We're loaning you this, Blink, till you get a good corner downtown." Always eager for news, he inquired what word had come from General Otis. I told him that I had heard from the General Secretary the day before that the General was taking the matter up with City Council. This false news appeased him somewhat, and we talked of old times until it was time for me to go. The hospital, situated as it was in a busy thoroughfare, was no easy place for a blind man to escape from. Yet Blink did escape. After the lights had been put out the night before he was to be sent to the asylum, the city of Los Angeles was 4 miles away, and the path taken there by a blind man must have been a devious one. But Blink found his way to a cheap motel where the landlady gave him a room with another blind man. In the center of this room was an oilcloth-covered table. She asked Blink to be as tidy as possible and place everything on it. She let her little boy lead him about the next afternoon. He asked the lad to go to a motion picture theater with him, where there was music. It was a continuous show, and they remained for hours. The youngster became restless, so Blink paid him $1 to remain another hour. Then he asked to be led to a pawn shop. When I found out that Blink had escaped, I inquired in his old haunts. No one knew where he had gone. I spent the afternoon looking for him, without success, but felt reassured because of the money he had. The evening, a package came by special messenger. It was wrapped about with many rubber bands. They ran in every direction. The address was written with lead pencil and was hardly legible. Inside the package of brown paper was $51 in paper, gold, and silver of different denominations. The bills were crunched, the silver and gold loose among the paper. The letter said, "I thought I'd send this back to you guys so the dicks wouldn't get it when they search my room. I won't need it anymore." It was badly scrawled, and some of the lines overlapped. I hurried to the address the messenger gave me. Blink, the gentleman to the end, had placed his head on the oilcloth-covered table before he drilled a hole through it with a revolver the pawnbroker had sold him. The next morning, the Times carried a little story to the effect that Frank Thomas, a printer, had committed suicide in a cheap hotel. There was no funeral for Blink and no headstone. I did not believe in such things. A young Irish burglar wanted to pray for him every night. I told him to go ahead. He was later sentenced for life as an interfered habitual criminal. I hope it has not interfered with his praying for Blink's soul, for I believe he had one. That was Bright Eyes by Jim Tully, the first story in Many Lies Were Told. And it gets me every time. He was a dark writer. And this is, Jim Tully is credited with inventing kind of the hard-boiled writing style, although he didn't like that accreditation. And his stories are dark and brutal, and they can pack a punch. Anyway, the rest of the book is a mix of, kind of hobo stories. And there's a biographical sketch of Jack Dempsey at the end. There's a nonfiction piece about the death penalty and going to watch an execution. And the stories are a mixture of, clear fiction and clear essay, nonfiction. But stories like Bright Eyes, I'm sure, are a mixture of the two. The bombing of the Los Angeles Times building sets the story in a specific time, which is nice, and that whole story is an interesting digression if you get into reading about it. That was 1910. I couldn't remember the date, so I just had to Google it. So all right, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you. I saw some people had joined the stream, and thank you for that. And it'll be online on YouTube for anybody else to watch. And definitely be one of the 30 people that pick up the copies of this for sale. And I think if you enjoyed that story, however bleak it was, you will definitely enjoy the rest. They are not all as bleak, but some of them